In this video, I want to talk about the mind-body problem. This is a famous problem in philosophy, and you can simply Google the title and find other videos on it if you're interested in doing extra research on this, extra learning. But it is coming from Descartes' notion of the evil demon and from Descartes' cogito ergo sum, which is his starting point in terms of what can I actually know for sure, and then what can I build on top of that. So because he employed what is called Cartesian doubt. Now his last name is Descartes. It has an S at the end of it, and it looks like the S should be pronounced, but it's Descartes. But when you want to use his technique or his material as an adjective, it's Cartesian. So when someone talks to you about Cartesian doubt, they're talking about this type of radical doubting, where someone is always asking, well, how do you know? Well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? And you're like, well, how do you know a lamp is in front of you? Because I can see it. Well, how do you know you can trust what you see? How do you know it's not a dream? How do you know it's not a hallucination? This radical, persistent, well, how do you know? And because Descartes really entertained that seriously and said, well, if I take your question seriously, I'm led to this one notion that at least I know I exist, because I must have a mind. If my mind is fooled, it must first exist before it can be fooled. So I think, therefore I am. That's his cogito. But it did lead into this mind-body problem, okay, or what is also known as the dualism, the Cartesian dualism, or the dualistic problem. And dual means two, and it does seems that Descartes is kind of setting up this space of two worlds that are existing: the mental world, and you have that mind, you have that mental world. In fact, one of these philosophers employing Cartesian doubt for you will say you have only your mind, because you never really know for sure that the world around you isn't a dream or a hallucination, or programming from the outside, if you will, from some evil demon. Now, the modern version of this today is that we're living in a computerized simulation. Okay, I don't like that notion, because that implies that there's a computer out there that's developing the simulation. I don't mind the notion of the simulation. I just think that is bringing back matter to the equation on the other end of it, when it's much better to talk about a god or a spirit that is producing this mental construct that we live in, because that can also be a mind, okay? Whereas a computer is not going to be a mind, it's hardware. But anyway, I digress. Dualism is this notion of there are two worlds that live together, the physical and the mental. Now, how do they interact, right? How do they interact? If we define the mind as that which is not material, and if we just have material on one end and then mind as defined like that on the other, they can never interact, okay? Because how can that which is not material ever find a handle to grab onto for the material world in order to give it a tug? And it really is that simple. I mean, if you want to think of it about that simple, think of a being that is purely mental, right? Think of a ghost, if you will, but not a ghost with ectoplasm. Okay, no Ghostbusters here. Just think of a purely spiritual being floating around. How will that being ever grab a doorknob to turn it, to get through the door? Right? Because that non-material hand of the being can never grab on to the material doorknob. All right? There's no connection. So it may sound kind of funny, but if you think about it, that is actually a good nutshell version of this problem. How do these two worlds interact? The trouble is, you have a mind in you. I'm distinguishing that from the brain. We can call it a sense of self. We can call it the spirit. We can call it the soul. But there is something in you that is convincing itself that it has its own existence, and that it is not simply an electron or a proton or a quark or a neutron. All right, because we often think of of it saying, well, the mind is not the body, but the body is nothing but electrons, protons, neutrons, quarks, the atomic particles that make up the elements. So I like to think of a something in you that is convinced, utterly convinced, that it's just not a trillion electrons and neutrons and protons. Okay, so that is what we all say is ourself. That's the real me or the real you, right? And yet we are in this body, which is physical. It's protons, electrons, neutrons, quarks, other particles, charge, electricity, magnetism. You get the idea. Forces. So I'm going to show you how this works. You see my hand right here, okay? I'm going to say the word close, and then it's going to close, okay? But I'm going to say the word close 4 times, and only on the 4th time will this hand close. All right? So here we go. Close, 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 close. All right? So here's where I'm getting at. If my command to close the hand was purely physical, a result of electrons and protons moving through charge, the contraction of muscle fiber, causing the lungs to contract and the air to go through the vocal cords, etc., then you have a sequence of physical events caused by the word itself, close. Okay? The physical pathways that it was domino effect, okay? It caused the lungs to contract, and the lungs did this in a certain way, and the electrons and proton, the charge actually ended up closing those fingers. The thing is, I didn't really feel like I changed anything in my body. I said that word 4 times, and the first 3 times I think were exactly the same as the 4th time. So if there's something physical about the actual word close and the physical act of the body saying it that's going to make the hand close, it should have happened the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd times, because I didn't change anything in the state of affairs that is, involved in this. The 4th time, I just simply decided to close my hand. It had nothing to do with the air and the words. So see, how did that happen? All right. So this leads to this notion that we've got a problem. And in fact, if you're interested in this, no one has effectively solved the problem. What happens is that people usually split into 2 major camps. One is the monist, both are monist camps. Monist means one. In other words, both camps eventually believe in only one major substance. One camp is mind. They'll say it's all mind. God is mind, you are mind, everything is mind. The other camp is going to say it's all body. Your body, the stardust is body, the electrons are body, the protons are body, the planets are body, the muscle is body. It's all just body. And then where's God? Well, unless God has a body, God is not there, So one side is very materialistic. The other side is very idealistic. Now, in this, if you run into someone who is a philosophical idealist, that doesn't mean that they're always hoping for the best case scenarios. Like, you might be like, well, he's just an idealist. He's just like, she's just like dreaming and hoping, for this beautiful scenario. No. Idealism here means that it's all idea. It's all mind. Okay, so those are usually how thinking people that really try to grapple with this problem, they end up in one or the other camps, right? In the mental camp, you at least preserve eternality because your mind and the mental doesn't die. You can't divide it, so it can never decompose. And God can be mental. But on the physical camp, you give up a lot because you give up the eternity of the self. Unless you actually do believe that everything that is happening here is the result of electricity and oxygen and your food, the body's burning it, turning it into oxygen and nutrition for your cells. And if that's really all that's happening, well, okay. But that's the material camp, all right? So the deal is, this leads to two different ways of looking at the world. Okay, now when you're asking what is really existing, right, that is called ontology. I'll put these words down in the manual, but ontology is the study of being. what actually exists. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do you know? Okay, so ontology comes first because you must believe that you exist before you can know anything. And you must believe that you have a mind that is capable of knowing. How do you know? Well, I know that it overlaps, but many times we simply start with the belief. That's a presupposition. A presupposition is something you just find yourself already believing. You don't need logic for it. You don't need evidence. You consider it self-evident. Okay? So many of us start off with this self-evident notion that we exist and that we can learn things. To us, it seems self-evident. And so the way we learn and what we learn, what can we learn and how we learn is called epistemology. Okay? So you have ontology and epistemology. Ontology, the study of being. Epistemology, the study of knowledge. Okay? Epistemology is complicated. Everything is. But in epistemology, sometimes you're going to get signage. Thankfully, we've got the first 3 or 4 videos to help us with that. But the signage is going to ask you to interpret. Right? Signs act in that middle space. And they have a messaging code for you. You have to decode it. So the act of decoding the signage is called hermeneutics. Remember, it refers to the Greek god Hermes and how he would come down from the gods with gnomic or cryptic messages that the human beings had trouble figuring out. And Hermes wouldn't help him. He just was the messenger. So, but because often these messages were so baffling, the art of being able to properly interpret these messages brought by Hermes was called hermeneutics. Okay, so hermeneutics is your ability to properly interpret signage so that you can receive knowledge, and your epistemology gets stronger. However, with dualism, the mind-body problem, you got issues because you don't know if the thing is mental or physical. And you can look at it some way, and it does seem like it's all going to be material or physical. But then you can look at it from another angle, and you can say it's mental. And this universe seems to have what I call, now this is my term, okay, what I call double coding, okay? It seems to have evidence in it that goes both ways. And you can look at it from one angle and say, aha, there's evidence that evolution is at play. You can look at it from another angle and say, oh, no, the very same material evidence that we have shows me that we were created by a divine intelligence. All right. Now, because of the double coding, the evidence is what is called equipollent. Okay. Pollent is power, and equi means the same. Another word to say it is equivalent. Valence and valere means to be strong in Latin. Equi means the same. It's the evidence is equally the same in this universe, which leads to an interesting situation. Because if you are a person that moves towards this notion that there was a divine intelligence, a God that created this universe, you do it because you want there to be a God. You are a friend of God. You don't do it because the evidence suggests that it had to be this way. Because someone else will come from another angle and say, the same story makes sense given a materialistic aspect, and I want to choose that one. And if both sides are equally powerful, why would you choose one over the other unless it wasn't desire driven? So there is a sense where someone who comes to and lives in what they believe to be is a material world, they get only the material because they've always wanted it that way. Whereas others that believe in God and heaven, they have this universe, and the signs in the universe make sense to them in this way because they, from the beginning, were aligned with a divine mindset. All right, so these are some very important terms that you need to remember. I know that I give them to you quickly, and I also know we're not going to be testing you over these. We want you to watch the videos at least once and think about it. Watch in good faith, bona fides, all right, give it a bona fide watching, and try to pay attention. And then as you begin to realize that this is really all around you, that you, whether you knew it or not, all along are a philosopher, It's much better for you to embrace your heritage or your design, I guess, and to get better at it by thinking about these problems and using the proper terms. So in this video, we've had dualism, we've had ontology, we've had epistemology, we've had hermeneutics, and we have presupposition.